was very lucky to have the chance to interview Ron Barassi one day, the absolute legend of football. And we were so engrossed in he made me feel that comfortable, despite him being such a legend, that we became so engrossed in the conversation that we missed the bounce of the ball to start the third quarter. We were just chatting away, and no one noticed that the players had come back out, got in position, the umpire bounced the ball. The two of us are just chatting. The rest of the commentary team are standing in the back. They're engrossed as well. No one's watching the ground. Like, oh, geez, Ron, we better go.
In this edition of Play by Pod, I have the pleasure of catching up with a great mate of mine, Brendan Jonty Rhodes, whose voice is synonymous with the Victorian Football League. We walk through his journey from calling grand finals in regional New South Wales before migrating to Sydney to call sport, and then betting on himself where he headed across to Perth to call the waffle. Rhodesy then headed back across to the eastern parts of Australia where he found his home in the Victorian Football League and had the pleasure of calling the future of the sport across numerous competitions. We talk about the value of calling sport on radio and how it helps develop the versatility in broadcasting, while we also discuss the challenges in place to broadcast sport at the highest level. Check out Rhodesy on Twitter, or formerly known as X, at VRhodesVFL. And make sure you check out the podcast on YouTube, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Pocket Casts, Spotify, and iTunes, while also jumping on board and following Play by Pod on Instagram and Facebook. G'day and welcome to another big edition of Play by Pod, the podcast that lifts the headset off the broadcast space and takes a deep dive into the world of broadcasting right around Australia, sharing stories and insights into to some emerging superstar broadcasters across the country, across a variety of sports. My name's Yeend and I've been joined by the voice of the Victorian Football League, Brendan Jonty Rhodes. Thanks for joining us, mate.
Thanks, Yeend. I wish I could actually say that was fully true, but I try to get to that sort of level, but we've got some wonderful callers around, yourself included.
Yeah, it's a wonderful competition, and on the back of what we saw last year, I think things are really starting to improve, not just in the men's space, but obviously the women's space as well, which I know you've certainly been across. So I guess that's just probably a starting point, mate. When we talk about the beauty about calling sport, the VFLW space is something that you've taken a great passion for over time, and the interest of what it is as a feeder competition to the AFL comps. How are you sort of enjoying it, and I guess what sort of gives you that spark to engage with it as you do as a caller?
Well, I actually really do enjoy it. The easiest way, I think, to enjoy it, and there's no disrespect intended by what I say here, is you don't try and compare it to men's footy. Same as the AFLW versus the AFL. You can't compare it. You've got to enjoy it for what it is, and the fiercely competitive. Like I don't know whether I'd want to be out on the ground being tackled in a VFLW or an AFLW game, that's for sure. But yeah, that their starting point, which AFLW was 2017, VFLW was 2016. The forerunner VWFL started in 1980. So even if you say 1980 is the starting point for professionalism obviously is only 6 years ago, 6 or 7 years ago. Men's footy have been playing, well, the VFL's been going since VFL's been going since 1875. The AFL's been going since 1897. They're starting 100 to 120 years behind. And my honest opinion, obviously, it will not take them 120 years to get to the level that men's footy is at now. They're probably already a lot closer than they were. So it's always going to improve, and I love being part of that and seeing the improvement of the players. And now we've got the majority of the young ladies coming into the two competitions are ones who have been playing football right since Auskick days. They haven't had to disappear at the age of 14 and then come back. And after 10 years or maybe 15 years playing another sport. Like there's only one or two really special athletes that have been able to do that and come back at the highest of high levels. Aaron Phillips, obviously, at the top of that tree. So the ones that have played footy right through, they're the ones that are taking the ownership of the competitions now, and we're seeing much better footy as a result.
I think a key thing that you mentioned before is that you really can't make a comparison from one level of competition to another. But I think that's the key takeaway as a broadcaster, is that it doesn't matter what level of sport that you're broadcasting, whether it's an under-11s game in rural WA or whether it's something at the top. As a caller, you go in there with the full intent to deliver a quality standard call that makes everyone feel really invested in the game.
Exactly right. And I obviously did a fair bit of footy last year from the VFL. I did some school footy the year before in 2022. The last 2 seasons I've done the AFL Masters, which is right up to over 65s. It's great to see those men and women still able to run around and get a kick. I certainly wish I could. Some of them are 30 years older than me and still a hell of a lot fitter than I'll ever be again. It's great to watch. Footy is a game for everybody at whatever level, and you said you enjoy it for what it is, for the contest, and you enjoy the skill level improving as these players develop.
Now let's talk about the roadie journey. You come from a different part of the country that's not traditionally the AFL heartland. The upbringing and then the investment in the New South Wales. Where did the dream start to get into calling, and why the infatuation with the game of AFL?
Well, we are at New South Wales. We say that's southern New South Wales, so we're well and truly below the Barassi line.
Yep.
Which we, even though for some reason they try to claim it as being the Murray River, and there's a big monument at Corowa indicating it, but the Barassi line is actually the Murrumbidgee River. So it's Wagga.
Yep.
So that's why you see so many wonderful rugby league players, so many wonderful footballers, so many wonderful cricketers coming out of Wagga. Whereas if you come south of that, it's a lot more football. So I certainly grew up with the local footy club and the local footy competition. The town I'm from is Daysdale. We had our little club, a population of around about 50 people living in the town. That's basically the maximum it's been. The highest the primary school got to when I was there was 26 students.
Half the population of the area.
Yeah, a few coming in off the farms and that sort of thing. But yeah, so definitely a small community, small schools, and the footy club is just the hub of the community. It's probably the same, your town a little bit bigger, but the same thing. Everyone does what they do during the week, and you congregate at the footy on the weekend. Cricket in summer, cricket and tennis in summer, footy and netball in winter, and that's just what you do. It's the one chance to get together, and I fell in love with the game at an early age. A lot of people will talk about how they used to see me running up and down well, not the main road, but the street out the front, which maybe got a car every 2 hours if it was lucky. Kicking the footy around and playing pretend games and commentating those games. I very quickly learned that my football ability was, how do you word it best? Couldn't get a kick in a fuse box. But I like to think that I wasn't bad at talking about it. So that's where the dream came. And I think it was 1997. I'd seen the previous couple of years the single cameraman on the roof of the afternoon tea shed filming the local grand final just so he could put it out on video.
Yep.
So I put my hand up and said, I'll come and call this game. And yeah, the first one was certainly memorable. A lot of people have told the story about how it was about 5 minutes before 3/4 time, and the scores were, I think there was about a goal in it, something like that. And there was about 5,000 people around the ground watching, and then all of a sudden they disappeared. And I was wondering what was going on. I turned around and looked behind me, and well, put it this way: the ace of spades is not as black as that sky was. And I just thought, well, what's going to go on here? We go just as the siren went for 3/4 time. The Jerilderie Football Club, famous for Billy Brownless, of course, they kicked a goal to level the score, and the sky just went whack. And we've got rain coming down at a massive volume, so much so that it was pushing me on a deck chair towards the edge of the roof, the volume of water coming across the roof. I couldn't tell you exactly how much we had, but you can sort of get the picture. I had an umbrella sitting here like this, and the hailstones were dong, 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 dong on the back of the head through the umbrella. The poor bugger boundary umpire is standing at centre half forward, cradling the ball like this, trying to protect himself. I'm yelling and screaming and carrying on about all this. Dropped to, what was the word? It's belting down. It's absolutely belting down here. Get the ball back to the centre so the game can start again. Yes, and I thought my whole career could have been over on that first day with the old F-bomb. But yeah, amazingly, the ground went from perfectly dry, lovely surface for footy. They played the last quarter under about 4 to 6 inches of water. The entire ground surface.
Did they have a crowd watching at the time?
Yeah, well, the crowd disappeared. My grandma, who was just sitting in her car over on the outer wing, was surprised that the passenger side door opened and one of the Jerilderie players got in.
So one of the players who was playing in the game
got in Grandma's car. Yeah, he wasn't having a bar standing out in that. They called 3/4 time. They played the last quarter in water everywhere.
Yep.
Neither team scored. Remember, the scores are level.
Yep.
Neither team scored. And a Waganya player managed to get the ball from a boundary throw in 50 metres out, threw it on his boot, and it went through post high for the only score of the last quarter as the siren went.
My goodness gracious.
Yeah. And to be honest, if he's watching Nace Knuckles Low,
yeah,
cheerio, mate, you gave me a great thing to call, and he's been dining out on that rightly ever since.
Now,
27 years ago.
Would I be fair to say you've called hundreds and thousands of games of footy? Would you have had anything as memorable as that? The game that's been decided off the last kick of the game off a last quarter like that?
It's certainly the first story that comes to my mind. Yep. Amazingly, the second one is the second game I ever did, which was the following year's grand final in 1998, when the same two teams played each other again, Waganya and Jerilderie. Waganya was 59 points in front 7 minutes into the third quarter, and you know who the king of commentators was at that time, Bruce and Dennis aside.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, the great Rex Hunt.
Yep, of course, in the late 90s.
So I've come out with the shrill old "It's over."
Yep. The fat lady's singing.
The fat lady is singing. Then Jerilderie started kicking goals, didn't they? And they got back to, I think, within about 27 points at 3/4 time. And then they kicked 9 goals in the last quarter, and Jerilderie won that game by 14 points from 59 down in the third quarter. My cousin, who was known for being a bit sarcastic, as Jerilderie hit the front, he said they've taken the fat lady out the back and kicked the out of her. I don't think either of us were able to call the next minute. We were rolling around on the roof. So,
surprised you didn't roll off the roof itself.
yeah, exactly. Well, they're the first two games. So you could pretty fairly say I was hooked after that.
It is interesting you say that from my calling background. The very first two grand finals that I called was Romsey and the Sunbury Kangaroos across 11 and 12, and they had memorable games. And I think of your first game, being decided with a kick virtually on the siren, your first grand final in your first game. My second grand final was decided where the team that hadn't won a premiership in its history, hadn't been in front all day. They weren't in front when the final siren sounded, but they were as the ball sailed through for a goal when the captain coach kicked that. And
oh wow!
And so I think of your first two games, two grand finals, and I think of mine featuring the same teams. And the first grand final I called went to 2 points, and the second grand final went to a similar margin. And they're two epics. And I would be fair, just hesitant to say that from our perspective, we've called a lot of footy, a lot of grand finals, etc. But if you put those two first grand finals together for both of us, I don't think there'd be too many that would be better than that.
They're certainly right at the top. Now, I've called a grand final in 2009 that went to extra time.
Oh.
That was in Sydney, UTS and Manly. One of our previous bosses with the VFL call last year, Lockie Buzzard, was actually coach of UTS that day, so he reminds me of that one all the time when we speak. But yeah, and another one in Sydney where the undefeated red hot premiership favourites kicked 5 goals, 18, and lost to their arch rivals 7-6 in the grand final. 2 points. 5-18 to 7-8 or something like that. Anyway, they lost by 2 points, having been undefeated in driving rain. It was just crazy. But yeah, those ones certainly don't bring the memories as much. I've been lucky enough to call back. About 20 years later, I got the old video of Daysdale's 1994 premiership, which was our centenary year. It was the year after we'd won the Wooden Spoon with 1.5 wins, and we won the last 9 games of the year to win the flag. I was able to go back and recall that one for our 20-year premiership reunion a decade ago. So that one's very memorable for me, of course, and a couple of others where I've been lucky enough to call my team getting over the line. Daysdale is now known as Corrine Daysdale Hopefield Burragie United. So there's the way football has developed in the country.
Of course.
And I was lucky enough to call them winning a premiership in 2007. I called my club in Sydney, the Norwest Jets, winning a couple of flags in 05 and 06. And then at the other end of the scale, I've been lucky enough, not as lucky as you, of course, who've made it to the AFL, but I've called a few pre-season games and got to call some amazing players there as well. So it's been a terrific ride, but there is still another step that I'm desperate to be able to follow you and take.
For those who are listening in, Rosie and I have known each other for quite some time. We've mainly talked in VFL circles, so as we've never actually sat down and had the conversation about what it was like sort of growing up and calling footy. So the stories you're sharing, I'm very captivated. These are stories I haven't heard from before, and I'm blown away. You come off those 2 grand finals, memorable grand finals to start your calling career. Where does it go from there? Like you end up in Sydney, and then you come down to Melbourne, and you slot into the VFL system. But where do you go from those 2 grand finals, and what doors sort of open up for you where you're calling a little bit more regularly?
Well, it was interesting actually. So they were the 97 and 98 grand finals. I also did the 99 Corrine League, the 99 and 2000 Corrine League grand finals, but the 1999 one, I was actually also the ground announcer.
Oh, beautiful!
So playing the team songs as they ran on with my old Samsung boom box, as it were, holding the microphone to the speaker as you did back then. having the CD with the national anthem on it gets stuck while both teams and all the umpires are lined up waiting
did it skip
start
as well?
No, it just got stuck and wouldn't play.
You had to sing it, surely.
In the end, I just had to send them away because no one wants to hear me sing. But yeah, then there was just a little small article in the local paper, the Corowa Free Press, saying that a radio station called WPR-FM at the time, Wangaratta Public Radio, was looking for people to help out with the calling of the Ovens and Murray Football League.
Mm-hmm.
So there were 3 of us that answered that calling, and start of the 2000 season, it might have been the start of the 2001 season, I think it was. I started off just as the stats man.
Yep.
Which is what I'd been doing for Daysdale during the season previously. I'd sit there with a little tape recorder, record all the stats, and then go back and transcribe it back later, so they all knew by Tuesday night what they got in the game. The old way of doing it, of course. So I did that for about the first half of the year. One of the main commentators was away for a week, so I got a chance to call a game, and I think I ended up doing 4 or 5 that year. And then that fella who you might recognise the surname anyway, Bernie Lonergan.
Mm-hmm.
His nephew Tom was drafted by Geelong.
Mm-hmm.
So sliding doors, Bernie gave the commentary away so we could go and follow Tom, go down and watch Tom playing for Geelong. So then I got the chance to become the number 2 caller, and the number 1 man and host was a fella by the name of Tony Carskelly, a good fella. He stood aside after about round 4, said he'd have enough. So 4 weeks into my commentary career, I'm actually hosting the show, and yeah, so I did that for about 6 years. Early in 2005, I went to Sydney, called in the Sydney AFL Premier League for a company called Digital Sports. We did the games, and they got edited into 1-hour highlights packages that screened on Foxtel on either Aurora or the old C7 Sport.
Oh yes, yeah, I remember C7 Sport
for a couple of years. Then I was lucky enough to go to Perth. I called the Waffle for 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Did a couple of grand finals there. One very not memorable because I got a really bad cold and basically was coughing and lost my voice and could barely, only was able to call about 20% of the game, which was a shame. So the main he was the main caller. He took over and got us through it. But that was a shame. Came back to didn't really like living in Western Australia. Great place to visit, but very isolated.
Did you have any family friends over there?
No, none at all. No. I do have now.
Yeah,
but back then I had none at all, and I was living and working in Bunbury.
Mm-hmm. So
that was a hour and 45-minute drive each way.
Yep.
To get up to Perth to call the footy. I was goal umpiring in the local league on the Sunday because in Western Australia they play all their local games on Sunday.
Yep.
All their country footy games are all played on Sunday.
Yep, to allow space for the Waffle.
They were at the time. Saturday. Yeah, exactly. The Waffle was on Saturday. The country footy all played on Sunday, maybe with the odd Saturday game where we have the odd Sunday game.
Yep.
So I was I did a season of goal umpiring there, which was great fun as well, but it was just too isolated. If I had family and friends over there, might still be there. But yeah,
am I right in saying you went over there to call footy? That was your
goalie to call footy. Yeah, I went over there without a job.
Yep.
And it took me a little while to get one, but once I did, it ended up being in Bunbury, so I moved down there and I worked there for about 18 months, and came back to Albury. Did 2 more years in the Ovens and Murray,
mm-hmm.
and then got a job with the Herald Sun as a sub editor. So I came down to Melbourne. Did the Mornington Peninsula League in 2016,
mm-hmm.
and got my opportunity to join Casey Radio in 2017, and as a second or third caller, and the same thing happened there. A couple of blokes fell by the wayside, and I think by about halfway through the season, I was hosting that as well. So I don't know whether I just scared them off, maybe.
I reckon you would have, by the sounds of it. You intimidated them.
So I was with Casey Radio 2017 through to COVID. 2021, I think I did some game. It was my last year with them, and it was obviously called off halfway through.
Of course.
I'm still effectively linked with Casey Radio. I've got nothing bad to say about them at all. And they're absolutely wonderful, and I'll hopefully call with them again at some stage. But then I got the chance to join the live streaming, and I've done that for the last 2 years, and desperately hoping that someone will see and hear and like what they see and have an opening to give me that chance that I've been hoping for 27 years.
One of the things I'm quite fascinated with your journey is you jumped from the radio into the visual side of things. That's personally, I found that to be a very tough transition at first. How did you find it?
It takes a while to get used to it. Because I've done it twice. I switched from radio to TV when I went to Sydney, back to radio when I went to Perth, and back to streaming again here in Melbourne. So it does take a little while to realise that you don't have to say everything.
Mm-hmm.
When you're listening on the radio, when people are listening on the radio, you have to really describe everything, where exactly the ball is on the ground. You have to say the score all the time. You have to just describe everything. Whereas in footy, in TV, in streaming, you certainly don't need to do that because the viewers can see most of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's more, you're telling people what's happening, but it's more just telling people exactly who's got the ball, what they're trying to predict, what they might do with it. It's a lot more analytical than the radio is.
There's through Play by Pod, the podcast over the last over the duration since I started, I've connected with a lot of people that have predominantly not worked in radio, commercial community, and gone straight into streaming. And I think that a lot of them wouldn't really understand the challenges that it takes place to bounce off between the two. How important is it to probably get that experience first in the audio as opposed to the visual?
I think it's absolutely critical because it really helps you understand the game more.
Mm-hmm.
If you're doing it on radio, like you're doing a half an hour or an hour pre-match, which is what I was doing with my radio stations, then you do the game. You have a quick little break, but there's analysis and maybe an interview at halftime with a player, an injured player, or someone like that. I was very lucky to have the chance to interview Ron Barassi one day, the absolute legend of football. And we were so engrossed he made me feel that comfortable, despite him being such a legend, that we became so engrossed in the conversation that we missed the bounce of the ball to start the third quarter. we were just chatting away, and no one noticed that the players had come back out, got in position. The umpire bounced the ball. The two of us are just chatting. The rest of the commentary team are standing in the back. They're engrossed as well. No one's watching the ground. Like, oh, geez, Ron, we better go. So that was. I've never forgot that. He probably did. It's just another interview for the great man. But I never forgot how terrific a person he was and how comfortable he made me when he really didn't need to. So
that spoke volumes of the person that he is.
Exactly right. So, and obviously even more proof of that was in the pudding when he obviously jumped into that fight down in St Kilda, and he was I believe from all reports, never the same after that. But you can be a legend and a hero, and that was the great Ron Barassi. So but so I always looked up to. I never got to see blokes like himself and Bobby Skilton, who I haven't been lucky enough to interview, but certainly have been able to meet a couple of times through the fact that he played for my club, and hopefully a lot of people who don't know me didn't know who my club was, because that's the biggest challenge is as a commentator, is if you're doing your club, they can't know who you barrack for. But yeah, as you're talking about young commentators, I've transgressed. I've got right off the topic.
Hey, we're engrossed in listening to the story of you interviewing Ron Barassi, as you were engrossed so much in the interview yourself at the time. You forgot the game was on. So for me, I was engrossed twofold.
Right into that,
yeah. A lot of people do come from that streaming background.
Yeah. Obviously, after the game, you got your boundary rider gets his interview, and then you run through all the games. Like you analyse the game, you give your votes at WPR, which became and is now called Oak FM, Ovens and King Radio. We have a correspondent at all the games. So in that hour of post-match, we're ringing up the other grounds and we're getting match reports and votes from all the other grounds. And so all that you've got to do, you've got to be up basically for 5 hours on a radio call. That has shrunk in recent times. Like I think the longest pre-match, Casey Radio and of course the other station, WBC, who does the VFL, I think they might have sort of half an hour pre-matches, and they might be on air for 10 minutes or 15 tops after the game. So that has sort of shrunk down from where it was. But when you're on live streaming, you're on air no more than 5 minutes before the bounce. You're off air no more than 5 minutes after the bounce. You're not doing anything at quarter time, half time, 3/4 time. So it's basically the footy. You're only calling the footy. You're not doing anything else around it. So so that's where radio, I think, is so much more important, because you really learn all the ins and outs. You get more chances to speak to the players and the coaches and everyone involved, and get more of an insight into how the game unfolds.
I found that when I was calling radio back for Highlands FM in the Macedon Rangers, that it became easier for me to get to know so many more people by going out doing those interviews, not just with the players, but I had this real focus of at halftime. You have Ron Barassi, for example. Like at halftime, if there was a special guest at the club, I got them in to have a chat at halftime, or I did a pre-record that I could play at halftime. But doing that just got me to engage with more people around the club itself. And I was able to build a little bit of profile for myself, which was great, but it was also opening up doors for people within the station, that anyone that sees anyone with a radio station, they're good people. Let's work with them. We'll put players up to be interviewed, or we'll give them information about the club, because that's the sort of stuff they're going to promote. So it increases your personal profile, but also the profile of the brand or the radio station you're with.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. So it's all about relationships, and unfortunately we can't really build those relationships as much when we just don't have the on-air time to do those interviews and that sort of thing. Obviously, a lot of people these days just want that. They just want the game, and then they move on to the next game. They move on to the next game. But I'm absolutely certain that there's still a lot of people that would love the opportunity to hear from Josh Fraser after a Collingwood game, or Josh Drummond after Gold Coast won the premiership last year. We did get to go and interview him for stories and that sort of stuff later, but we're not lucky enough to be able to stream the finals past the second week last year, if you count the wild cards, which is a bit of a shame. But you can build, as I said, build those relationships. Those coaches or the best player on the ground, a Tom Wilson or Sean Manor on grand final day, who's obviously now got himself drafted. How good would it be to be able to put those interviews to air after the game?
Mm-hmm. That'd be unbelievable.
Yes.
That gives the viewers something extraordinary to do, and it also gives you as a caller or as a broadcaster a chance to sharpen up on your interviewing skills.
Yeah, exactly. And when the players and the coaches and the officials in particular, when you're trying to confirm teams at the start of the game, when they know who you are and they trust you, you build that trust so that you're not going to reveal any information they give you until after the release time. Then they start offering stuff to you rather than you have to chase everything. And I'm being nostalgic a bit here, but yeah, it'll be terrific to build that up again. But don't think I'm not enjoying what's going on at the moment, because I certainly am. It's terrific to call it one of the three best leagues outside the AFL, and just see some wonderful football every week from some absolutely terrific footballers in a 21 team 3-state competition. There's twists and turns every week, and then obviously the 12 VFLW teams as well, which is obviously growing, and we want to help them to continue to grow.
Look, I can honestly vouch for what you're saying about the being involved in radio because of the connection that it has with the community. Having called a lot of VFL football in 2023 myself, and then joining up with the great man Peter Holden as part of Wharf Radio for AFLW, which was strictly audio. Our team up here in Queensland had the opportunity, the capacity to go and participate and engage in the press conferences, and then do some interviews afterwards that could be used on social media. But because we're from a radio perspective, it just opened up doors where we can go, hey, well, we may not be broadcasting, but when I find that when you're doing strictly audio, there's more analysis and more in-depth analysis that's involved. And we were able to use that to our advantage by interviewing the coaches after the game as part of the official AFLW press conferences. So I really find the audio platform just gives you that little bit more.
Yeah, without a shadow of a doubt. And I did neglect to mention Peter and thank him. He's obviously the doyen of women's football broadcasting with Wharf Radio, which he started. I think it'll be 10 years this year. It did have a season. I did have last VFLW season off, but because the games are being now live streamed. But to get a chance to call 4 AFLW games is a massive highlight, and even fly interstate to do one of those games. Called that before, even though I'd worked and called in Sydney, to go to North Sydney Oval for that game early on in the season. I'm always going to be grateful to Peter for that opportunity, and I look forward to continuing to work with him as well.
Certainly sets a platform for some wonderful and exciting things in the future. For those who are listening to the Play by Pod, make sure you like, share, and subscribe. We're available on all the major platforms for where you can get podcasts on YouTube and all on social media. We've certainly got some wonderful opportunities to share stories, just like we've got with Rhodesy here. We're turning to sort of our main highlight discussion, and it's something that is your Mount Rushmore. The Mount Rushmore is to be able to call at the highest level, whether that be TV or radio. What are the challenges that you found that have got in the way that make it difficult for people like you who are constantly on that fringe to go that next step?
I think the biggest challenge is obviously quite clearly having a name.
Mm-hmm.
Having a name, being well known. There's always retiring players coming out of the system every year that that get the opportunities to go in, and they might start as special comments people and then develop into callers. If it's proven that it's not their sort of area of expertise, well, then they'll move on. There's another bunch of players that'll retire next year.
Mm-hmm.
So getting that profile, getting that opportunity as a non-player, a non-ex-player, you know what I mean, is so much harder, and it can be very frustrating when you see, I suppose, guys who have been brilliant footballers, probably never called a game in their life, and all of a sudden they're calling AFL football and doing a terrific job. So most of them, So that's the thing. It's just getting that first foot in the door, prying the door open for a start, and that's the thing that I've found quite tough. I'm very lucky that I was given 3 opportunities last year to do phantom calls at the MCG with SEN, and hopefully they like what they heard, and that can potentially go somewhere. But that even though those games never went out into the public domain, they're just unbelievable highlights. Like I'd called a couple of games at the MCG before, a VFL game a couple of years ago, and the last International Cup Grand Final in 2017, which was the first time I'd been into the commentary boxes at the G. And that I don't know how many people watched Papua New Guinea beat New Zealand by a point, but it was an amazing experience. And the player who was best on ground that day is now a household name. I'm sure you know who I'm talking about. Yes. Just down the road from you.
Yeah, absolutely. Ace, the great man,
Ace.
Huago Oya from the Gold Coast Suns.
I've been fighting a losing battle on that. Obviously, it's since been confirmed by the Suns that Oya is the way he pronounces it. But back then, we were told that by the Papua New Guinean officials that it's Owaya. So I was, obviously, if you go back and find that game on YouTube from 2017, you'll find me calling him Owaya all the time. They said no, it's Huago Owaya. Just call him Ace. That's all everyone does anyway.
I think they have had trouble pronouncing his name anyway, so stick with the nickname.
Do it either. But yeah, he was 16 years old in that grand final, and absolutely proved that he was a mile above the level. If I remember rightly, there were a couple of guys who have developed into VFL footballers. And one of them are from New Zealand. One of them, McKelty Lafau, is now trialling for a list spot at Richmond. Pretty sure he played in that particular game. Miss Alifi Faimalo has just moved from Richmond down to Sandringham. Was another one from New Zealand. And I've completely gone blank on the name, but a tall fella whose first name was Paddy, who played for Ireland in that tournament, and he ended up coming through one of the series of the Recruit the following year, and got himself a spot on Geelong's rookie list for a couple of years. I believe he might be back in Ireland. So someone with a better memory than me will definitely remember him. But so that international rules tournament, not international rules, international cup tournament was it can be a breeding ground for potential players coming from overseas. Daniel Marshall played in that tournament for the USA, and has just retired from Essendon. And I think there were about 4 or 5 of the Irish Banshees who came across and played AFLW football as well. So there's a lot of good memories there. At the top of the list, I'd have to say, this last year, the 3 Phantom AFL calls, 4 AFLW calls, the 2019 VFL Grand Final, which Richmond beat Williamstown in by 3 points. The Seagulls hitting the post twice in the last couple of minutes when they had a chance to win it. So
Yeah.
There's a lot of memories there, but we could be here for 5 hours for me to go through them.
But what that actually says to me, though, and because we're talking about that capacity to break into the next level. I mean, we highlight the challenges that are in place. It's a very saturated market. We are seeing retired players coming to the fold, and this isn't just AFL. It is every sport. It is incredibly challenging for those who have really cut the mustard at grassroots level, who have come through multiple channels and are on that fringe of trying to break into that next level. But one of the things with that in mind, and I think you telling the story of that International Cup game, it's the one thing I appreciate about VFL football. Last year, I had the privilege of calling a fair bit of sport. I had the privilege of being involved in the call for the QAFL Senior Men's Grand Final. I called VFL football and I called AFL football. But the thing that I loved the most and the thing that I got the most out of was calling VFL football, because you got the chance to see the stars that were getting ready to come up. You got the chance to see the stars that weren't drafted, but were able to having their shot at the VFL with the hopes of getting drafted next year. And so I see, I would probably encouraging people who'd be listening going, I would love to get that big opportunity. I think that tier just below provides more memories, because I found that I embraced the opportunity to call AFL football, but the research was very minimal. And I found that I was able to pack so much more into a VFL call with the insight that I had from the players above, with the insight of the players coming through. And I've felt that was a memorable calling experience every time I went out there. So there'll be a lot of people going out there, wanting to step up to that next level, but I don't think you should be unsatisfied even at that level. And it's easy for me to say because I've got a couple of AFL games under the belt, but I appreciate that tier just below a little bit more.
Yeah, and you're exactly right with that. And as I said earlier, I've been able to do 44 waffle games. I've done, I think over 100 VFL games now. And yes, you're exactly right. The research that you can do and the information that you can put across is, a lot of the times, it's stuff that people who are watching or listening don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas so that's what you're saying at AFL level. There's not as much insight that you can come up with that isn't already out in the public domain, because it's already so heavily it's so heavily scrutinized and reported on that everyone pretty much knows everything about everybody.
Yeah. I would say that with when I was calling a lot of games in 2023, and I'd be speaking to the Melbourne-based clubs that were coming up to Queensland, particularly the AFL-affiliated clubs, I'd speak to their media managers, and thanks for you for helping with the contacts there. I do appreciate that. But I would say to them, look, we already know these AFL guys that are coming down. Give me something on some of these young players. And I'm very fortunate on some occasions where they give me some details on some debutants with their parents being up in the crowd and being up around the box and able to hear the call. And you get yourself up for that. And there's just something exciting about a debutant doing something special. I mean, I can't get over calling Harley Reid. Like those are the things that just, it stands out in your mind that you're seeing something special that maybe the AFL or the international cricket world or the international hockey world will see later on down the track.
Oh, exactly right, and absolutely loved the chance to call a couple of Coates Talent League games at that same sort of thing later in the year. I didn't get to call Bendigo Pioneers, but I did call Harley Reid playing a VFL game for Carlton.
Beautiful. We're in elite company there, mate, because he only played in two, and we got them both.
Yep. And I called the likes of the Tassie Devils. So McKercher, who was the number 2 draft pick. Leak, who was one of those, all 4 of those drafted boys. I was absolutely stunned that Ari Schoenmaker slipped all the way to number 62. He has got a rocket on him. You think Trent McKenzie's a super boot? Look out when you see this kid kick. I've seen him. I saw him in the space of 2 minutes in the preliminary final that they lost. He kicked a ball in from full back that landed on the wing, and I mean properly on the wing, not close to the wing, right on the wing. And then when they overlapped, they overlapped back through the middle, and he was able to receive a handball and kick the goal post high from 60 metres. He's 17.
You can't do that as a 17-year-old.
Oh, exactly right. And that was in the same passage of play. so that's a memorable one for me, for sure. But yeah, most of those young ones like Nick Watson, who's a top tenor to Hawthorn, called him at the Eastern Ranges, and it's going to be amazing to watch these young guys who I called in only a couple of games last year, admittedly, but seeing them make their way in AFL footy and just trying to work out exactly what they can be.
One last point that I'll touch on before we wrap it up, because again, we can go on for a long time. That's just how you and I operate. For those who are listening to the podcast, Rhodesy and I spoke maybe half an hour before. We're like, okay, we better get this done. We better get into it. And it's something you and I have spoke about privately before. But the key thing you mentioned earlier on when we spoke about getting to that next level, it's about profile. And so my advice to younger people out there that would be looking to try and get that little bit of profile, it's the digital space. So if you get the opportunity to cut, we've got to become more familiar with the dynamics of social media and your video editing. And if you can grab any of the audio and find a way to spoon feed it into the social media world through the various platforms and find a way to make it engaging, I think that's a different element in today's day and age where we can build that profile that may be able to help us knock on that door. And I say, well, it's a community of a lot of those who are looking to try and go that next step, because you've already got the established personnel who have put in the years and years of hard work over the journey, whether they're just professional commentators or ex-players at any sport. But now we're in that golden age where there's a lot of streaming there, so there's a lot more chances for us to get on the microphone. But then we've got to find a way to better promote ourselves for other platforms at the top level to go, hey, this person's got 200,000 views on this bit of passage that they called. Let's look into this person.
And if anyone knows how to teach me how to do that sort of stuff, because I'm from the previous era, it would be. I definitely know that's something I've got to get a lot better at. That's for sure. And you say you're exactly right. It's all about selling yourself and building that profile to get yourself the opportunity.
And it's a tough market as it is, but it almost becomes, you know yourself, you get out there and you can call a match to our standard. And I'm very biased in listening to a lot of your calls, and I listen to a lot of other people's calls. I actively follow commentators in all different sports around the country, which is why I love doing the Play-by-Pod podcast. And you've got a lot of the key fundamentals embedded to perfection. You could call a game with your eyes closed. And I think people in your position, it's like, okay, well, the easy part is that. Now let's focus on being able to show the world some of this wonderful talent that we've got. And but I almost sort of feel that there is so many opportunities to call that there's just that capacity to just be satisfied with doing what we're doing to a high level. And then when there is a change in hierarchy, maybe that door will happen. You've been there multiple times yourself where people have dropped off and you've slotted straight in.
Yeah, exactly. At the lower levels, and hopefully that chance comes again. I'm obviously as close as I've ever been. There's been a couple of possibilities down through time where I thought I was just about there. One in particular where I was just about in the door in Sydney, and I got quite sick and missed most of the season, so I missed my opportunity. And the person, and absolutely nothing against him, the person who was my number 2 in Sydney got that chance, ended up being the number 1 caller in Sydney, and eventually became the Sky News correspondent in Washington, D.C. So there you go.
It's a sliding doors moment there, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And if I hadn't got Crook, who knows what would have happened?
You wouldn't be calling AFL football. You'd be over covering Sky News.
I probably wouldn't have taken that. I probably wouldn't have taken that opening, but yeah, just getting that foot in the door and having the door open at the exact time that your foot is ready to go into it is the key thing.
One last question before we wrap it up, and a nice and simple one. You've had your hurdles, you've had your successes. What is your biggest driving factor to call sport?
Just the absolute love of the game. Quite simply, ever since I was 5 or 6 years old, I'd go and visit my nan and pop on the weekends. We'd sit there in front of the telly. We'd watch the whoever it was, usually Williamstown, the VFL on the old ABC TV back in the day, and we'd sit there and watch greats of the game like Sadi Gartzi and these guys going around. He was, as a little kid with the big hair blowing all over the place, he was an absolute hero of mine.
On the wing, he was the best.
Yeah,
he was the guy you'd watch for every time.
Yeah, so we'd watch Williamstown or whatever VFA game was on the Saturday afternoon. Then on the Sunday we'd sit up again and watch the Sydney Swans, because Pop was the reason. Pop was became a Swans supporter back in the 1940s, and I'm now third generation of that. So on the Sunday we'd sit there and watch the Swans. Remember, they just made the move to Sydney, so they owned Sunday afternoon football. You sat down on Sunday afternoon, it was always the Swans. Warwick Kappa sitting on people's heads and being Warwick Kappa. So he was my first hero in the AFL, and in fact he'll probably love hearing that 39 is the only number I've ever worn on the back of my Guernsey. So I'm sure he'd love hearing that, the Wiz. So, but yeah, so that's where it all started from, and then you get a little bit older, you'd go and watch Daysdale play on the Saturday afternoon. We formed an under-16s team when I was 11 years old. There was only about 13 or 14 of us, and we ranged in age from 16 down to 6. So we'd borrow players from the opposition, and the bigger kids would try and do most of the work, and us little ones in the middle were running around like chooks with their heads cut off trying to get a kick, and the little ones were sitting on the cricket pitch in the middle making sandcastles. That was just where footy started. So a country town, it was footy, and then cricket in the summer, cricket or tennis in the summer. So there wasn't much else to do except sport. So I just absolutely fell in love with it, and it's never waned ever since.
Magnificent. Brendan Jonty Rhodes, thanks so much for joining us on the latest edition of Play by Pod. Absolutely thrilled to see the potential that you've got, particularly as the voice, in my opinion, of VFL football, and the passion that you have for VFLW as well. I've been following your socials, as I'm sure a lot of people that follow the competition do, and they admire the stuff that you do to promote, even in the off season, some of the wonderful things going on. Thanks so much for your company, and we look forward to some wonderful, exciting things from you in the future.
Absolutely fantastic. Thanks, Yeende, and thanks also to you for having this podcast and giving us up and coming callers and a few that have obviously made the top level. Some of which I've called with at local level. Seeing them go and make the top level is a source of pride for me too. Because even if they were only with me for a season or even only a handful of games, it takes. It's a privilege to me to have said that I may have played just that small part in helping them get to where they want to go. So and that's what you're doing now with people in this podcast. So fantastic work, and long may it continue. And look forward to speaking to you about the VFL and VFLW during the season again.
Yeah, it's super exciting. It's just around the corner. If you're a fan of this sort of thing, make sure you jump on board Play by Pod on all the podcast platforms right around the online circuit and of YouTube and across socials. Rhodesy, thanks so much for joining us, and look forward to hearing your dulcet tones in the upcoming VFL season.